Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the beer-evangelist Fred Biltman, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome to episode 12. Scott?
Yeah,
We are
12.
here.
They're clicking right along.
Yeah, we are here opening up another episode of Michigan's Great Beer State podcast. And we're going to be sharing an interview from the here and now with Peter Manthei of Brewing in a little bit. But as always, we start out handing it over to Scott, the Executive Director of Michigan Brewers Guild, for some updates for our brewery members, enthusiast members, and beer-loving public. What's going on, Scott?
Well, another week has passed, and I guess we're still operating under kind of restricted operations. We've seen the restriction on bars that sell more than 70% of their total sales in alcohol, limited to only takeout and outdoor seating, no indoor seating. Initially, that did not include the regions around Traverse City and the Upper Peninsula, but it was extended to those regions recently, and we further saw a directive, I guess, that is requiring. I'm not entirely clear on who to enforce, but for some more mandated enforcement of mask wearing, social distancing, some of these other things. And I have heard some reports from breweries that indeed this is happening and they're out there. So I think it's really worth noting that while, of course, social distancing, mask wearing, all those things really are the right thing to do, that when we look at bars that are over 70% alcohol sales, that's for bars, and breweries are not included. They have a different license type. They're looked at differently, so they don't have to close even if they have no food or limited food. That does not apply to them, but of course all the mask wearing and other provisions do. So again, we've said it over and over again. It can be trying and frustrating and aggravating, but do follow the rules and wear your mask into any brewery or restaurant, and wear it till you're seated at your table. Take it off to eat and drink, and then put it on again if you get up from the table to go to the bathroom or leave, I guess. So more of the same. It's but I guess the good news is that we are still functioning, even if it's at a slightly reduced level.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned this before too. There has been some extensions to licensed areas where breweries and or other bars and restaurants, but in our case, breweries have extended their outdoor seating, and there's also some social zones. So in some cases, at least while the weather's nice, their 50% capacity may not be 50% of what it once was, because they've been able to add some areas to serve. So certainly that's something that I think everybody's grateful for, is that opportunity to serve more people than they might have otherwise without that extended license.
Yeah, it reminds me also of there's was some recent legislation that created these social districts that municipalities can apply for a permit with liquor control to have a common area where multiple adjacent licensees could serve alcohol. And I think that there are 4 places that have applied, and the first one received their license today, and I believe it's about in Belleville. So Grand Rapids has applied. I'm not remembering the other 2, but I think we'll see a few of these open, and they can probably be fun places to to have a drink.
Yeah, and those are shared spaces where you can have a drink from one place and still traverse over to the area of another if they're connected through that zone. And we talked about this on an earlier episode, and I don't recall the date, but could you share when those sunset? It's got a little bit of time for those to maybe be a little social experiment at the same time. I mean, I think it was 2024
Yeah,
or
so
something
there
like
were
that.
several. Yeah, there were several provisions, including the cocktails to go. And I'm not sure if the social districts have a sunset. I have myself confused, so I'm not going to say. I'm just not going to say because I
Right.
can't remember. There are sunsets on some of the provisions, but there was a whole list of things, some of which had an end to them and some didn't. And I
Yeah.
don't know if
So
that's one of
take a
them or
look
not.
at
I
it. But
better
if I
check it out.
recall correctly, the
Yeah.
sunset was a couple years out at minimum. So I think that is just an interesting opportunity to experiment with shared space. What I know several people have bumped into when they want to have events, when they want to do something for their community, this inability to traverse over a license threshold with a drink, saying, no, there's a party outside, but you got to dump that or finish it in order to move 2 feet over and then have another drink. I think this is an interesting opportunity to perhaps show how this could work. So, it's very difficult times, of course, but I think some of the loosening of these regulations gives communities an opportunity to work things out in a new way and maybe look at alcohol differently in the future. So that could be a little positive we gain from this creative problem solving going on. That's my
Yeah, it
optimist hat,
certainly
anyways.
seems. Yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable um, in an adult way to enjoy alcoholic beverages. So I hope it works great and we see more of it. Another thing that I was going to discuss a little bit is the Brewers Guild's been producing a series of little video clips, and they started with I guess we would call them regional animations, but the real effort was just to try and share something that promoted our member breweries, and we focused on regions and some different subjects as well, and we're kind of evolving that video promotion to have a new focus. So it's still going to be very beer focused, but it's not going to be so regionally focused. So I invite anybody who's listening to check it out. You'll find it just by following our social media if you don't already. But they're fun. Hopefully they're engaging enough for you to share. And I just invite anyone interested to check that out.
Right on. And so they can find that in social media. There's a gallery on their website, and you can also go to the Michigan Brewers Guild YouTube channel directly as well. And those should generate and pop up in all those places, if I'm guessing correctly.
I believe that's all correct.
Excellent. Every once in a while. Anything else our beer loving public should be thinking about these days? It's interesting times for sure, as we've said on every episode since this show was born in the middle of the pandemic. But any encouraging words or thoughtful quips for the fans of breweries out there?
Well, it's the beginning of August. We've had a couple of cool evenings, and I always start to look for the very first signs of a tree changing a little bit of color in northern Michigan at this time of year. So that might be something that some people look forward to. It might be a little bit sad to know that the end of summer is not too far off, but we've got a couple good months left. So August and September are probably the two best months of summer.
Yeah. Well, with that, we can jump right into Brewers Dozen, our weekly segment where we give a shout out to 13 different breweries so that we can get through our membership roles throughout the year. Scott, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, let's start sort of in the middle of the Lower Peninsula at Bad Brewing Company in Mason, which is near Lansing, for those of you who don't know.
Right. And I've got the next one, which we mentioned in a previous episode briefly, Big T Brew Pub in Lawton. So they've been singing great beer well ahead of their time. And what the reason they came up last time is I didn't realize they were a brew pub. So Big T Brew Pub in Lawton, Michigan.
Yeah, they have been pouring specialty beer and special beer since they couldn't get very many special beers. But we also have Brew Detroit in Detroit. Interesting operation. They do quite a bit of contract brewing, plus they have an on-site pub. They have a small brewery that they make one-off batches with at the brewery as well.
Excellent. And another longtime member is CJ's Brewing Company out of Commerce Township.
Yeah, they were in the early days. I don't know, 97 maybe. I'm
Something like that.
Guessing near.
They've been at a lot of festivals, and they are a brew pub serving on premise.
Another longtime member, which is also a brew pub, is Lake Superior Brewing Company in Grand Marais, and this is kind of a operation added on to the Dune Saloon. So a long-time watering hole in Grand Marais, which is on the south shore of Lake Superior in the Upper Peninsula.
There's a lot of great places to visit a brewery in Michigan. That is one of a kind, historic place. So if you find yourself there, you've done well. That's about what I got. Hopefully not too many people at the same time. It's a special place, but one should get there in their life. Next up is Luddington Bay Brewing Company in Luddington. So that's a great place for live music.
Relatively new. Yeah, they're relatively new, but I think they're making a nice impression. I hear lots of good things about Luddington Bay. Of course, our friend Tom. I think Tom may be retired now, but he was working there.
You got the next one?
Oh, Eastern Market Brewing Company. So relatively new brewery. Fun place right down in Detroit. I think they've got an expanded outdoor service area as well. And of course, the Eastern Market, they're right around the corner from our Detroit Fall Beer Festival, and a very historic area.
Next up, we have Grand River Brewery. And if I'm not mistaken, they have locations in Jackson and Marshall. Is that right?
Yep, their original location was in Jackson, and they added a Marshall location that opened, I believe it was last year. Forgive me, Grand River Brewery, if it was a little longer ago than that. And we have in Ann Arbor, Mothfire Brewing Company, which is, I guess it's a reincarnation of what was Pileated Brewing Company. So Mothfire is a relatively new name with a brewery that's been around for a few years. So if you're in the Ann Arbor area and have never heard of that, you might want to stop in and check out their beer.
Excellent. Another longtime member, Rochester Mills Beer Company, also did a lot to contribute to the Brewers Guild over the years, with Eric Brigham serving on the board for long term as president. Mike Plez doing a lot of work for the Guild in the early years. So big shout out to Rochester Mills in Rochester.
Yeah, here. Great member that's participated for many years. I'd like to mention Stoney Lake Brewing Company in Saline, which of course is it's the Ann Arbor, greater Ann Arbor area, I would say.
Right on. Next up, coming from Flint, Michigan, we have Tenacity Brewing Company. Right on the river, big outdoor space. Tenacity.
And we'll finish up with a Z, Triple Root in Zeeland. Nice small town brew pub in Southwest Michigan. So that's 13 and a bonus one with the second Grand River. So cheers to that list of brewery members.
Yes, absolutely. Cheers. So in this episode, we're going to talk to, as he's billed on their website currently, the bearded half of Beard's Brewery. Peter Manthei. He's also on the board of directors for the Michigan Brewers Guild. This is a conversation from the here and now versus the archive from the Rising Tide Project. But I very much enjoyed talking to Peter. I thought he had a great enthusiasm and entrepreneur sort of perspective on things. It was great to hear their story.
I think so too, and I've known Peter for a while and been familiar with what they've been doing. But like all of these interviews, you learn so much and feel like you really get a up close and personal inside look at the brewery operation when you listen to them talk about it. And I just think it's really great how kind of detailed and thoughtful they were in their planning, and they are in their execution at Beards. And they've certainly been on a steady pattern of growth. And, they now operate a really cool tasting room restaurant operation in Petoskey, where they started with just really, kind of a hole in the wall. And they have their little production brewery to support their distribution of beer more broadly, that's located in Charlevoix.
Yeah, I also liked the sort of relationship to the community, meaning they sort of discovered their passion or their idea away from home and said, I want to bring this to my community. My community that I grew up in needs this. And I just think that's always a compelling story. And it's great for the heartbeat of a community. So I think that's not uncommon. That is not entirely unique, but it's certainly part of the pulse of it all. And I also loved, like you said, getting to know a little bit about their business and kind of where they come from. If you met Beards now, you would assume, look at this bustling, COVID aside, look at this bustling sort of existing business. And then to think about two business partners trading off brewing on a one barrel system, that has a whole different origin story in terms of, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And a little bit of risk as well, to say, we're going to figure it out.
Yep, and they've done a great job, and it's another great interview, which is the point of this whole podcast, is to tell these great stories to more people.
Yeah, and I hope that can bring fans of the brewery or breweries, the people that are featured. I think it hopes. I hope that it brings insight to those who are already supporting and already fans and can learn a little more and dig a little deeper. And then on the other hand, I think it'll bring to light some stories about brands that people weren't familiar with, and maybe they go give them a visit and get invited to experience the beer because of a new introduction. So I think this is a great example of a brewery that will reward that invitation, people getting to know them. So I think it's a good time to hand it off to Peter, Beard's Brewery in Petoskey, Michigan. Here's Peter.
Cheers to Beard's Brewery.
Welcome, Peter. Nice to see you. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on the podcast, and I think this is a really cool thing the Guild is doing. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, these days there's a whole lot to talk about. We've been, in the midst of this great changing, massively changing landscape with COVID and everything. But as a way of getting started, I'd love to hear about your kind of origin story and how Beard's Brewery came to be, how you got into this wonderful industry and what started it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how long you want the tale to be, but I'll start with the genesis. Let me know if I'm going too long. I can always
Yeah,
speed
will
it up.
do.
But
I understand by your bio, you're very verbally enthusiastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I started kind of a love for beer early on. I was really into coffee growing up. When I was younger, before I was drinking alcohol, I'm still into coffee. And I was into baking. So I was like kind of into how things were made. And so that kind of is what led me to craft beer. And then from there, in northern Michigan, when I graduated college, I was going out in California, and there was in Santa Barbara area was a little brewery called Telegraph Brewing, and they had like literally a garage door, like warehouse space. They would open up like, I think it was Thursday, Friday, at like end of the brew shift, like maybe like 3 o'clock, and they'd just stay. The brewer would be cleaning up, and he'd pour a couple pints. They had a tiny little bar like right in the production area, and so that kind of, I caught the vision. I started home brewing at that point, and then picking those guys' brains about like commercial brewing. So when I graduated college, I wanted to move back to Michigan. I have a lot of family here, and I'm from the Petoskey area. And the closest at the time brewery was Shorts. So it was almost a good hour drive. And this was back in 2011. And Sheboygan then was kind of the other way we could go. But, an hour drives, it's hard to make that your local spot, So I had a business partner that he drove back. I asked him if he would come to California because I was going to drive my car back after school. I was like, we could do a road trip. And he had one more year of school. And I said, hey, I've been doing this home brewing. And I think Petoskey could really use a brewery. And this is before Petoskey Brewing had announced anything either. So we did a lot of home brewing together that summer, 2011. And he was into it. And he's like, yeah, let's do this. So we put a business plan together and kind of ran with it. Small scale, started with a 1-barrel brew house and a really little, about 800 square foot space. About half of that was brewing and half was a tiny little pub. And that's kind of where we launched. Opened in August 2012.
Wow. And so if I heard correctly, when you started homebrewing, kind of getting the bug from looking at Telegraph setup,
yeah,
did you have that entrepreneurial streak turning before that first brew? Was it like, I'm going to learn to homebrew and I want to open a brewery, or did it generate a little bit later after you had some experience?
That's a good question. I don't know if anyone's asked that exactly, and it causes me to think. So I had an entrepreneurial bug kind of in general, I would say, because I come from a family where a lot of my uncles were in, and my dad was in business together, did like heavy construction. Before that, my grandpa had started a veneer mill up here in Petoskey, and him and his brother had started that. So I always felt like I had a little bit of that, like wanting to start something. And so I think that for me, I don't know that I started the homebrewing specifically thinking of starting a brewery, but once I got into it and I got more in love with beer and the craft of it, I think the opportunity just seemed obvious. Then it was like, oh, there's this hole in our home market where I want to live, and there's no brewery,
Yeah. And so, transport me to those early days of getting beards together. So how long from, I don't know, say idea or business plan to serving customers, and what did that feel like to be opening the doors to your community?
Yeah, it was a crazy time because we were just maybe like right before the next big explosion of craft breweries. I think there was right around 100 breweries in the state when we started, when we opened, or when we got our license. So, I mean, I think we're over 400 now. So it was like just before that, everything was going fast. And so I guess we started doing a lot of home brewing together, getting sample recipes to friends and whatnot in the summer of 2011. And then also working on our business plan. So it was only about a year from when we decided, it was a little under a year maybe from when we actually decided to pull the trigger to when we opened. We worked hard because we knew like, hey, if we want to open in 2012, we got to open in the summer because that's our season up here.
Right.
So we were like all fall, and my business partner was finishing school up at Northern, and he would come down on the weekends. We were remodeling our space, and we did a lot of the work ourselves. Some friends and family that were tradesmen helped us out, but we put it together on kind of a shoestring and got rolling. So yeah, a little under a year, we got it off the ground, and it was quite a journey. Looking back, I don't know sometimes how it doesn't even seem possible.
If you put it on paper, it probably wouldn't look like it.
Yeah.
How big of a team did you grow to get open, and what were your roles like on as partners or as you started to add people in?
Yeah. So when we opened, we had spent most of all our money on like getting ingredients and getting the equipment and getting the remodel done. So we were like, man, we can't hire anybody. We're going to have to do it ourselves. So we were both doing brewings, kind of splitting shifts. We would do like double or triple batches. And so we would kind of split the days up. And we were learning the equipment, so we maybe weren't as efficient on it. But yeah, we started together, splitting up most of the duties and then serving at night. And we were only open like maybe, might have been only like 3 days a week, the first, little bit there. And we did get open later than we wanted. We ended up opening middle of August, and we had been shooting for June. But licensing and construction and everything, you run into the reality of it. But that ended up turning out being good because a week in, we started running out of beer. And I remember after our first, because the summer is so busy, so fall then gave us a catch up period. But I remember when we first opened, it was like the first day we were brewing hard, working hard, and then serving beer at night. And that first night we were like, okay, we need to hire somebody. There were customers, and we were like, we can't do this forever. And we had one application prior to opening, just an interested brewer who ended up becoming our head brewer for a little while. And he's a great guy, Nathaniel Morton. I think he's brewing at Pipeworks maybe in Chicago now, or he had been. But anyways, he had submitted an app, and we were like, look, dude, we don't know if we're gonna have money to pay people. But then that first week, like we called them up, we're like, all right, we got customers, we're selling beer, we need help.
Yeah.
And we had some friends that helped, in those early weeks, but yeah.
That's wild. So how did that develop then? What did getting through the first year look like? And how did you guys kind of organize yourselves? I mean, from such a shoestring start, and it sounds like, and your business partner is Ben, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Ben Slocum, also a native of Petoskey, or we both grew up here.
Great. So you guys are just doing everything and overlapping and sharing brewing responsibilities. So I guess what did year 2 look like, or the second season, and how did roles develop or change?
Sure. We started dividing a little bit more. In the early days, we were still all very hands-on everywhere, even year 2. But we got Nathaniel, who we had brought in. He had just helped serve at the beginning, but he was very clear he wanted to brew. And so we started working him in to the brewing side as well. And Ben and I were doing a lot of the brewing together still. As it's kind of slowly broken apart and the pub's grown, we now have like a full restaurant and stuff. Ben's really heads up like our HR and our pub operations, and I do more of our sales, marketing, and high level production. We have a a head brewer, and I work with him kind of on the higher level production stuff, but he really handles the details. So that's kind of how we've divided it. Basically, I'm a lot more on the wholesale and production type stuff, and Ben's more on the pub and like books and accounting, HR stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. And did that take a little while to come? And how prepared were you for the beginning of a summer season come 2013?
Yeah, so we learned a lot. Like we were like, okay, we need to figure out like, you want to keep beer fresh, but we were also like, we need to fill our cooler. Like, so at June 1st, it's full because like we need that for summer. So we would start in the maybe like March brewing like stouts, imperials, like things that were going to be heavy and store well, and start stocking up for summer. And again, on a 1-barrel system, I think our peak year we put out just shy of 300 barrels on a 1-barrel system. We were just all the time brewing, and so we had to limit growlers or discontinue growlers sometimes late in the summer if we were going through too much beer. But overall, we kind of found the balance of how many hours we could be open, what services we could offer. And we just did beer in the early days too. We also had a back. We were behind a building, sort of in the back of a building. So it was a little harder to find too. So it kind of had a speakeasy feel. The people that found it kept coming, but I think that ironically helped monitor our traffic flow a little bit.
And did you have a sense of maybe share who you wanted to be as a brewery? Like, did you have a sense of a mission in terms of what type of beer you were going to make, or, as either before or as you started to come into existence, what did you feel like your signature was, and how would people recognize you as a brand or a destination?
Yeah, I think there was a couple things for me. From the actual beer style, Ben and I both had a little bit different tastes. So we were able to, being both doing brewing, we were able to kind of get a good variety. And we always were really open to letting like whoever was around come give ideas and input. We never want it to be the brewery where it's just like the one guy idea of what beer should be, right?
Right.
But one of our core tenets that we've really stuck by and is we don't do a lot of the big crazy odd beers as much. We stick not exclusively to core ingredients. We've definitely branched out. Some of our beers have additives, but even with that, we try to play those like more subtly so that the core beer ingredients really speak through on the core styles. So I think that's something that we've done. And then from a brand standpoint, I always kind of was into like visual arts and stuff. I had a little bit of film background, and so I really wanted to make sure like our brand quality of the visuals was as high. And so I think for us, part of that was creating that fun experience with the art and with the, we do kind of cartoony labels, and making sure though that whatever we were doing, we were partnering with folks that could execute at the quality level we want it for those things, and not just putting it out to get it out, but making sure we took the time to give the attention to the whole brand that we felt the beer deserved too.
Yeah, it's great. And what sort of feedback did you get, or did you? I guess I'm wandering through two different questions here, but what was the reception like in Petoskey, and what was it like kind of being home and then having this second chapter of your life, really, in terms of now you're in Petoskey as a business owner developing this thing, which is different than, a student, et cetera. What was that shift like for you personally, and or reception for the brewery?
That's interesting. So reception for the brewery, maybe I'll tackle that first. I do this a lot when I ask questions too. I ask multi-part questions, so I understand that. I think the reception was really good. It kind of from the get-go, I think the appetite was there. The appetite Ben and I had that was like, this is missing from Petoskey. And for us, a core tenet of our value too was being downtown. We want to be part of the downtown community and kind of the core business district. And the day we opened, or probably like a week before we opened, this guy showed up, and I was upstairs, and he's like, oh man, I came to help. And so I figured Ben knew him, and I gave him a paintbrush. He was painting trim. Then I went down somewhere, and Ben came in, and he gave him a project. And then we both realized that we didn't really know this guy. and it turned out he was a really cool guy, and he was our first customer, ended up being one of our best customers. He passed away a couple of years ago. But he used to own a homebrew shop, and he just wanted a brewery. He was like, I just can't wait for this to open. He's like, I noticed you guys said you were going to open in June. It's, July, you're still not open. So I came down to just help you get open. And the day we opened, he brought his own vacuum cleaner down and like was vacuuming our hallway.
Oh,
and
wow.
And it was just, so I think that was the community that we wanted, right? Those type of people that were like desperate for that place. And we don't do any TVs. That's always been another thing for us. So we really want to facilitate the conversations and the like gathering place. So
I love it. And that's just great. I came here to help, and how I got here. We'll get to that later. Let's get painted.
Yeah, let's just get it open. He's like, I got to get a beer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So then the second part is sort of like, what was that like from your perspective, being a local and kind of having this new role in the community? Did that change things for you?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I had spoken a little before about like my parents being entrepreneurial and my uncles, but they were a lot more in like B2B businesses, So it was a big shift, even though I'd seen that growing up, kind of the idea of owning your own thing and doing your own thing, to do a really, customer focused, a service industry type thing. So transitioning, I think I realized that maybe what I wanted a brewery so that I could go hang out, and it's like when you open it, it's like, oh, there's not a lot of hanging out, there's a lot of working, which I knew would be that, but I think the transition for me was maybe learning to appreciate all the work that goes into it as well. Fortunately, I enjoyed it, right? It didn't just become a job that was like, oh shoot, this wasn't what I bargained for. But I think it's switching your mindset from just hanging out at breweries and enjoying that to like learning to enjoy the work behind it and the process and the all the rest of things that go along with business. Yeah,
absolutely. And so you've already kind of alluded that your brew size has changed. Sounds like your building may have changed. So what does growth look like over the years? How have you expanded? And kind of what's the shift from what you were at opening to now from that logistical point of view?
Yeah, when we opened, again, it was a 1-barrel system. We had like 3-barrel fermenters. We were doing a lot of that. And in about a couple of years in, we were like, we keep, just about running out of beer at the end of the summer. It's really hard to keep up with this demanding brew schedule. We had always wanted to get into distribution somewhat right from the get-go, but being small, we just knew we needed to focus on getting the beer right, getting that tap room feedback, and kind of keep the beer close to home. And we had dabbled just a hair in distribution as far as like doing beer dinners and one-offs. And back in that landscape, we had to have a distributor. It was before any self-distribution, so we were sending 2 kegs of this and 2 kegs of that, and that was it. But we had that kind of relationship, so we talked to them and said we'd like to scale this up to help our own needs, but also we could have extra capacity then. So we started looking for a spot downtown, but putting a full production brewery in, the trucking, the different logistical things, we couldn't quite land on a location that hit it all and kept us in downtown. We weren't going to move the pub out of downtown because for us, it was really important to be part of the community there. So we ended up finding a spot in Charlevoix. There was kind of an empty warehouse we were able to rehab and turn into a production site, which is not huge. It's about 3,000 square feet. We have some outside storage as well. We have a 15-barrel brew house in there. So that let us start scaling up. And we put in a lot of capacity, or like a big chiller, and laid out how we could add tanks as we grew. And so that in 2015 is when we finally opened that site and started doing more distribution. Of course, the landscape had gotten a little trickier. So as far as a lot more people distributing, and we were just distributing in like 3 counties around our area to start. So we've just always taken a slow, cautious approach. And just last year, for the first time, we completed our statewide footprint. So we added Southeast Michigan, which is, where the bulk of the people are. So we're now statewide, and we do can and kegs. And when we started, we were just doing kegs at the production site. So
yeah, that's exciting. And so how about the pubs? Your tasting room, how did that change over the years?
Yeah, so we had always talked about adding a restaurant component. That was kind of early on. We felt like the food and beer pairing it was something that was important to both of us. It's why before we were really distributing, we were doing some beer dinners and stuff with other restaurants. And we had started even bringing like some catered dinners into the pub a couple times, and did pairings with local restaurants right in our little pub. But so we were keeping our eye out still for a location to expand in downtown. And an opportunity came up that was good deal for us, and we were able to kind of catch what we wanted to do. So we moved to a lot bigger space that had water views, had a kitchen, was previously a restaurant, and so that let us add that restaurant component. So we went. It was big though. It's been a huge learning curve, because we went from like 11 employees with the brew team to like 80 employees the first summer at the new site, with like full service dining, full kitchen. And it was, we were a little overstaffed maybe at that time, because we didn't know what we were doing, but we've learned a lot.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, what year was that?
That was summer of 2017.
Okay, so not simultaneous with your production move, but shortly right after. So you went from one project into the next project.
Yeah, I joked. I was like, man,
something else.
It seems like we can never get into any kind of routine, because we reinvent the business model completely every couple of years.
Yeah,
but I think in your early years, that's a lot of what it is. You're putting your time in, you're working hard, you're not taking much out at all. It's like, it's about building that thing you had a dream of,
Yeah, and I've always said over the course of my career too, part of the challenge in the craft brewing scene is the growth is always so dynamic that you're always, whether it's energy, dollars, or hours, you're spending for next year at a size that's dramatically different. So you're always sort of outpacing yourself, because next year's going to be bigger. So
yeah,
it just seems like you're always applying resources that are undersized for where you're going to be. And your success is driving that. It's what you wanted, but it means you're constantly playing catch up. And
we tried to plan ahead, like as best we could for some of those steps, and invest ahead a little. But yeah, it's really hard. You just never know where it's going. You are thinking like, we're always like, what's the brewery we want to be, right? And that's the type of purchases we're making, and like staff decisions we're making, and like, is it time to add a sales rep, or is it time to not? We talked about that. It was like, well, we want to be a brewery that gives good service, and if we start we don't want to wait till we've distributed a ton and then nobody has heard from us, and they're like, well, these guys, there's no people behind it. So we were like, we want to make sure we have a rep right away. But in the early years, your rep it's like just a money, it's just an expense thing, right? Until you get the sales. But we felt like it was important, so we've tried to do that, like what you're talking about. You're making the investment for that next step that you want to be.
Yeah, it's tricky. And that's the art of entrepreneurialism too, right? Like, or
Yeah.
it's just that balancing act is partly what it's all about, that you've been around with your family.
Yeah.
Has your view of the brewery you want to be, has that morphed and changed? Are there any surprises about things that you want Beards to be now that weren't in your imagination when you first got started?
Yeah, I think for us, we want to, like I had mentioned, we want it to distribute. We want it to kind of be a local place, and we felt like food was an important component of the whole craft story. I think what's maybe bigger picture ideas now for us is venturing into other craft elements. We started a show called What's Your Craft, and you have an awesome podcast as well, this Craft Nation, where you talk to artisans and crafters, and like I think that whole idea behind like why we started it intrigued us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what drew us to it, and now there's people doing that in other industries, and that's really cool too. And so we started doing this show just last year. We interview people. We don't have a ton of episodes yet. It's kind of a side project, but it's important to us because we also want to provide, if there's other holes in our small town, holes in the market, so to speak, but also like what we feel like people want, right? They want that genuine experience. So we've talked about things, and these are out there, so don't expect like next year from Beards. But like offering like a butcher shop, and like maybe getting into making cheese and like some of these other craft things, because I'm a visionary type person, so I just have these ideas and things that interest me. But I think it would be cool to be able to live in a small town and offer some of those type of things that you don't always get in a smaller town.
Yeah, it's exciting, and looking forward. And it also seems like what you've done in the last 7 or 8 years, sets up the opportunity to think about other ideas that, there's no way you can think of some of that in the first stages. You're just trying to get yourself started.
Yeah.
So that's an opportunity that's been born. I feel like, it's important to talk about how the landscape has changed, and kind of the community of brewing, even pre-COVID, which I think has a whole nother side to it. But like you were saying earlier, the number of breweries has changed dramatically since you opened. What was your sense of community coming into this in terms of beer brewing, Michigan brewing, and how has that developed?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I thought what was so cool about the industry is, it seemed very open, and the people that started it, the genuine crafters, they want to share what they're doing. I listened to a recent podcast you did with that guy that makes leather shoes.
Yeah.
Right. And he talked about that. He was like, hey, people call up, like, I don't have an apprentice now, but if there's somebody who wants to do this, I would take an apprentice, because it kind of is what he alluded to. But he's like, they'd have to want to make boots, like not as a side project, like, but they care and have the passion that I have for making boots. Right. And so for me, the community was very welcoming, and I had done it was a walking beer like tour with shorts like a year maybe before we opened, and they had like some things on tap at downtown Woj. The sales guy was like walking a group of people around. You like signed up for it and like had a beer at each of the spots. And it was really cool. But I remember talking to him. This is just a fun memory. Talking to him, walking behind the building that we now are in with our restaurant and pub, and telling him that we wanted to open a brewery, and we were working on the steps to open the brewery. And him being like, I mean, it's just a guy he's talking to. Like, what does he know? Like, are we serious? But he was, very encouraging. And in those early days, like, I just thought it was cool that being like basically a no name, we could call Shorts and be like, hey, I've never used a Zamenagel like to check carbonation. Like, do you have someone that can show us? I want to make sure I'm doing it right, or like just technical questions. The community was very open. The other thing we did was join the guild, which of course this is being put on by, and I guess that's the thing you mentioned, like, what did you not think of in the beginning? And we thought of joining the guild right away, but I never thought like I'd run for the board of the guild or beyond the board of the guild. But I think it provided so much value to me in the community aspect that's something that I wanted to be able to give back to once I got to a stage where I could do that. Right. I mean, I still have a million things going, but I think my roles changed such that I'm not just behind the brew kettle. I can afford to like step out and do guild meetings and like offer back to the community that helped get me going.
Excellent. And do you remember what your first intersection with the guild looked like? And kind of where you, where that sense of value was generated from or born from?
Yeah, I think the first thing was like, I don't know why, we were just like, yeah, it makes sense to join the Brewers Guild. And then probably because I wanted to go to Winter Festival. I think that might have been the first festival we went to with the guild.
Yeah.
So that was cool. But the thing that really, where I was like, this is value, not just like fun, was the winter conference, because we went to it I don't know if we went to it the year we opened or if it was the following year, but basically very early on we started going, and that was, again, the networking opportunity was the value I saw more than anyone, just rubbing shoulders with these people that I had looked up to their brands. They inspired me to get into craft beer, and there they were, and they would talk to you and you could get ideas, and we both shared a passion for it, so I think for me, the winter conference is one of the most valuable resources. Now there's even better speakers, there's even more technical resources than ever before when we started, but there's still that great networking opportunity too.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, and the conference is something. I just share your opinion. I think there's a lot of great stuff that the guild does for the members. For the people that are members, I think the conference is a remarkable opportunity to I don't know, build your awareness, your expertise, your relationships, your community. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, if you don't come away learning something, you probably weren't paying attention. I mean, I feel like I always.
And if you weren't paying attention, you're gonna come away with something like.
Yeah, you probably at least had good beer, right?
Yeah, and probably a new pal or something like. It's something for everybody.
Yeah.
So that you shared that you're on the board now, and that kind of segues well into my next question is, so what's changed for you as a board member, and is there something that you wish more people knew about the guild, or anything you feel like sharing now that you've had some time as a board member?
Yeah, this has been obviously a super interesting term, right? Like we technically, the new members came in January or right at the conference. Then we did a little strategic plan. I think that was like early February, and we had like one other meeting, and then, everything went COVID crazy. So we've continued to meet virtually, but we've talked about a lot of things that, I mean, who would have thought first year on the board, like talking about canceling all the festivals, talking about like what do we tell our members, like how do we help people through this time in something none of us have experienced before, right? So I don't know, like it's not exactly what I anticipated working on.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I think it's been good. I'm glad that I'm there for those conversations. I think we have a really strong team as board members with a lot of diverse experience, and smaller breweries, brew pubs, bigger breweries, and so it's nice to have a group like that to bounce ideas off, and I think we have really strong staff too, so I think that helps when you're in a crisis time, that you can rely on the staff as well.
Yeah, it's a remarkable team. Well, I think that brings us to talking about our Great Beer State last call questions.
Yeah.
It's a series of questions we're asking everybody, and it'll bring us into, kind of starts out bringing us into the COVID craziness, which is so with the pandemic is sort of the name of the question. How has COVID-19 and all the related regulations and shutdowns and openings, how has that affected your business and your industry outlook overall?
It's obviously, we're in northern Michigan, so we've had a little different experience than some downstates, but areas. But everybody got shut down, right out of the gate, fully shut down. We went to delivery. We went to curbside pickup. We were able to do that. So it affected our business model in that we've always been kind of a slow, cautious place, but we had to make now decisions, more than we've ever had to. And I think that's maybe challenged us to think about trying, not being as afraid to do new things. And if it doesn't work, try the next new thing and try the next new thing. Whereas before we'd think it through a lot before we ever got to the trial stage often. And so I think that's changed. We're still running at reduced capacity. So it's just kind of a different thing. We were working on growing our wholesale and our off-premise more, getting into chains. That's an area that we're working harder on now than ever before, so that we can hopefully move more beer that way. And thinking of new things. We're just starting like a local delivery service for beer, because we think it's a new era. It's going to be people are trying different things, and delivery might be a good long-term thing, delivering beer to local customers, and just offering that sort of value. And for the industry as a whole, I think that's kind of a two-part, because we're part of the restaurant industry and we're part of the brewing industry, now that we have a restaurant component. So I think it's obviously been really hard on restaurants. That's one of my favorite things to do is travel. And like my favorite thing to do when I'm traveling is eat, so yeah. I want to see the industry come through it healthily. I'm optimistic that it'll encourage some reforms that would allow restaurants to be maybe more stable than they have. I've seen customers be more open to new ideas and changes and things. And so I'm hoping that I know there will be some attrition, right? I think that's just what it is, but I'm hoping that the people that can make it through and the core can really be a strong building block for a new and maybe more vibrant, more healthy restaurant and food service beer industry.
Excellent. The next one is the more you know. So what beer style are you most connected to, and what do you wish more people knew about it?
Yeah, I like a lot of beer styles, but I know for sure what I would say is ESB. I feel like I did a semester abroad when I was in college, and it was like a traveling semester. We went around England and Scotland and Ireland, and ESB is just a style that is way underappreciated in the US. I feel like, I wish people knew that it's not an IPA. It's not like super bitter. If you don't like an IPA, you might like an ESB. They're caramely. They're very nutty, like hop features nice, but it isn't like overly bittered. I mean, people make them differently, but so I wish more people would give it a shot. I think it suffers a little bit from like the amber category problem too, where people are like, oh, it's just an amber. It's just like the idea that it's not special because it's more of a straightforward beer. But
yeah, I agree. And the amber has had a rough go, and yet it was the workhorse of the craft brewing renaissance, and is a beautiful pairing style also along with ESB. But it just, didn't get in. It wasn't dramatic enough to stay in the conversation in a way. So anyways, appreciate that. It's a good one. Your ideal home bar. So the idea here is asking you about how your home bar is set up, and then if that translates to any suggestions for people who are now more likely spending more time serving and enjoying beer at home.
Yeah. I have a little mini fridge for beer. And then I have like a little like dry bar tabletop with some liquors and bourbons and things. But I guess for me, I really like having the little beer fridge, and like I kind of curate that, and I'm not fighting for space in the main fridge. And like, so for me, I think it's ideal to have like a dedicated spot for your beer. If you're into beer and you like to have different varieties and things. But the other thing that the pandemic has changed for me is, I wasn't going out and shopping hardly at all. So I was like, man, I should drink more of what's in the fridge. And we talk about fresh beer a lot, and I think some of us are guilty of like I've just been hanging on to this, waiting for the right occasion, right? In our beer fridges. We're all busy and we're out doing stuff, and you don't always get to those bottles. So for me, really thinking through what's in here and is it stuff I'm going to drink? And there is some stuff to age that's legitimate to age. But the ideal setup for me is keeping it fresh, not getting I don't have a huge fridge for beer. I just have a small mini fridge, and I keep rotating through things. I have a couple special things I'm aging, but mostly it's trying new things and
And drink them.
Yeah, keep them fresh.
Love and hate. What current trends do you love or hate, and how are they reflected or not in your brewery?
This might not be popular. I'm not a huge seltzer fan. I don't think it's a trend in that. I think the category will stay around for a long time healthily. I mean, obviously it will slow down at some point, but mainly because I'm all about the flavor. I mean, I really got, like I told you, I was into baking, I was into coffee. I really got into beer for flavor. And for me, you want to coax that flavor out of, and I also told you we make more straightforward beers. I like coaxing the flavor out of the ingredients. And so for seltzers, for me, are just like, let's make the alcohol and then add some flavor, right? And I think there's a place for that, and some people are doing cool stuff with it. So we're working on a seltzer for our tap room, but I don't think that I would say, how has it affected us? Like, I don't anticipate us getting into the distribution seltzer game, right? Like, being a brewery, people might not realize, with the way different licensing works, we have to make stuff if we want to have it on. And having a restaurant, we want to have variety for customers too. So I'm not the stalwart that's like opposed to trying the new thing, but for us, I don't think we're going to become a big seltzer player.
Yeah, and you have those two sides of your business and personality to kind of deal with, the production side and or the restaurateur side.
Yeah.
And you can make choices there. That's good. Do you remember what your first drink was? I guess I'm inferring alcoholic beverage, but it can be whatever comes to mind.
Oh, yeah. No, I was thinking alcohol. I saw you had emailed this question. I thought about it a little. And I can't tell you for sure what the first one. I'm sure this wasn't my first one, but the first impactful drink was Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. I mean, it was an industry, starter, and I had older cousins that were into beer, so I wasn't drinking way ahead of 21. I had some beers ahead of it, but I wasn't like a big drinker. But what turned me on to it was seeing starting to see some of the variety. And then I remember one of my cousins gave me a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like, there's something really going on here. And that kind of sparked it for me.
Nice. How about your worst drink?
Worst drink. Oh, that's a tough one too. Oh boy, I've had some, out of date beers. I've had that kind of thing comes to mind. I can't tell you that I have a specific one that I was like just awful. Boy, that's a hard one
Well, that's good. That's a sign of
focus on it.
That's a sign of good drinking and selective memory. You've made it through, and beer under the bridge.
Yeah.
All right. Last one then is, who is a bucket list drinking companion? So somebody you have not had a beer with that you'd love to.
So I think one of your other podcasts, someone was talking like historical figures as well.
Yeah.
And I think for me, for like a historical figure, so when I mentioned ESB style before, we made an ESB called Out of the Silent Planet, which is based, that's the name of a C.S. Lewis book. He wrote kind of a space trilogy, a lot of people don't know about. And I had done a little research on like what kind of hops were being used and would have been in a lot of the beers in the pub when Lewis was writing. But he had a writing group called the Inklings. They met at the pub. I would love to have been there for that, or, had a beer.
Yeah.
J.R.R. Tolkien was involved in that. I'm an English major. I like art. I had kind of said like movies and books. And so for me, having a beer with Lewis would be really cool, probably as a historical figure. And as a modern figure, somebody that I could feasibly get together with, I don't know exactly. There's so many people. I'm definitely into music and whatnot, so I might go with like a musician. Like I like metal and like progressive metal and that type of music. And there's a kind of obscure artist called Devin Townsend. He's a Canadian guy, and he makes great music. So maybe Devin Townsend, have a beer with him and talk about his music. All
right, Devin, if you're listening, beer has been ordered. We need borders to open up and a few other things to go our way, but I think it can happen.
Awesome.
So Peter, thanks for spending the time. Thanks for serving on the board of the Michigan Brewers Guild, and you and the team at Beards doing so much to bring beautiful beer into the world and contribute to your community. I really appreciate it. So thanks for joining, and we'll hope to talk soon.
I appreciate you having me on. Cheers.
Thanks for listening and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. The Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997, with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998. Its now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry in every way possible. To learn more, visit us at mibeer.com or say hello on one of our social media pages, as we love hearing from you. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer.
Let's drink